Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and delighted to bring you this year in review episode as 2022 comes to a close. We feature in this episode number 190 some of the best resources that I've come across over the last year. Now, I'm especially grateful to you, the listener, for tuning in to these conversations each Thursday as we try to bring you the best of the best in terms of resources that will benefit you, the nonprofit leader, or the aspiring nonprofit leader. However you come into this sector or want to join this sector, I'm going to continue to provide resources that can help you do it even better. Now, my gift to you as the year comes to a close is to bring together some of the best resources, and I thought poetically I would organize them around 22 resources from 2022 that will allow you, especially if you're in a state of reflection as the year comes to a close, or maybe you're planning ahead for 2023, or frankly, whenever you're listening to this episode, I'm going to give you some ideas that perhaps are in response to questions you have as a nonprofit leader and will aid in your strategic planning for your personal career journey. Now, before I get into this list of resource material, which, by the way, will be highlighted and linked in the show notes, so as you hear concepts or topics or guests or books that you'd like to learn more, go to the show notes. I'll have it linked up, so all you'll have to do is click your way to the exact resource to which I'm referring. Now, before I dive into the resource list for 2023 and beyond, I have to acknowledge some things of which I'm proud and milestones we have reached as a firm in 2022. And it starts with the book, Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, for which I am very grateful for the response I got to that. It came out in March of 2022, and now a few thousand of you have taken a shot at reading it, or perhaps it is on your reading list. And I'm delighted to bring the 7 keys to nonprofit leadership and career development through that format. And in fact, turned many of these concepts into our mastermind program that in fact does replicate those concepts and bring it into an actual format through the Mastermind Leadership Development Program. We completed our 10th cohort of that program at the end of 2022, and I'm delighted at the response we continue to get from these fantastic leaders from across the United States who come together in a virtual setting to build their personal strategic plans, but of course they're supporting each other in creating a community that now includes over 80 members of our mastermind community. Speaking of celebrating the 10th cohort, Leadership Gift School, a program for which I am the lead facilitator, completed its 10th cohort in the fall of 2022. Another fantastic group of nonprofit leaders. This program brings together executive directors and chief development officers as a team, and they go through a cohort of 5 monthly programs, meeting with funders, talking about articulating their nonprofit's mission and case for support so that it can achieve a greater level of funding. And again, this group will continue to support each other. And if you are interested in any of these programs, by the way, for example, Leadership Gift School and its 11th cohort is coming together right now for the spring of 2023. And you can go again to the show notes to find out more about that. I was also privileged to be part of the New Development Professionals program, which completed its 6th cohort of a wonderfully talented group of aspiring and new-to-the-field nonprofit leaders and fundraisers. And this group completed its tasks as it went through a program together in the fall of 2022 as well. I'm excited about the future of nonprofit leadership based on the kind of talent that is coming into the sector. And I know many of you listening fall into this category and might find benefit in joining our 2023 cohort of new development professionals. Of course, all of these programs I'm sharing with you allow me to bring the message forward that I love to talk about, which is nonprofit leadership. We need to support this sector, not just the leaders that are currently leading wonderful organizations across the world, but also helping those that aspire to join our sector in new and more comprehensive ways. And I was able to take that message on the road a number of times in 2022 and grateful for a dozen of these opportunities to get on stage and talk about nonprofit leadership and how we can enhance this career journey for those of you that want to do just that. So shout out especially to my friends in the AFP community. AFP Icon was an opportunity for my colleague Lee Williams in Las Vegas at its 2022 event. But I also was able to share the stage with some other colleagues in AFP Los Angeles, AFP Charlotte, as well as other conferences throughout the year. It was also fun to join many of my colleagues in the podcasting space as a guest on their show to talk about nonprofit leadership, which is a topic that I know is on the minds of some of the podcasts that you're listening to as well. Thanks in particular to Rhea Wong, to Jay Frost, to Dolph Goldenberg, among others, who allowed me a chance to speak on these topics on their shows. Of course, I want to offer a special acknowledgement to the 36 nonprofit organizations that allowed us to partner with them in 2022, providing leadership development support, strategic planning, as well as fundraising services. These partnerships really are the manifestation of our mission, which is to help talented individuals like you excel at nonprofit leadership. And of course, that manifests itself in different ways through these various services. But thankful for our opportunities to learn from and with these organizations and the great staff and board leaders that make them succeed. All right, well, I know you're listening now to get some resource to help you on your path to nonprofit leadership, and I've organized the remainder of this episode in 3 different categories. Number 1 is fundraising, which is always on the mind of nonprofit leaders and will be, those of you that are pondering nonprofit leadership. And there's some great episodes across 2022 that are going to give you ideas and opportunities to expand your abilities there. The second category is more of a nuanced area of nonprofit leadership, but must be in your toolkit. And I think you'll see what I mean in terms of financial management and technology. Which are often underrepresented, I think, in the leadership development in our sector. And again, I've got 4 episodes in particular that you'll want to check out as you sharpen your skills in those areas. And then finally, as the title of this episode implies, I want to talk about you and the category I've described as future focus. What are you going to do to develop your board next year? What are you going to do to develop your team? And what are you going to do to develop yourself? And again, there's some resources, including podcast episodes, as well as some of the best books I've read in 2022 that you might want to add to your reading list as well. All right, let's jump into the fundraising category of resource material, which, again, I know requires your time and attention. And there's no better place to start than episode number 150. Rhea Wong gets you in the right state of mind to raise money. And that is an important element, of course. Before you can get into all the tactics, you yourself have to be comfortable with the role you play as a leader who also is seeking investment in your organization. Now, after you've gotten into the right mindset for fundraising with Rhea Wong, check out episode number 172 with Deepa Naik, who's the Director of Philanthropy for the Marlankus Foundation, and she puts together a wonderful conversation about 3 key elements that funders are looking for as they consider your organization for their philanthropic support. As you continue to build your philanthropic platform as a nonprofit leader, there are 2 episodes that will help you on the tactical level in particular. Holly Rustick has wonderful resources around grant funding and diversifying your fundraising in general, as does Autumn Keck. Autumn is in episode number 143, Holly's 134. Both of these will give you some structural foundations that can help build your fundraising capacity in 2023. And to wrap up this section around fundraising, don't forget Jay Frost's episode. It's number 167, where he talks about some of the horror stories that fundraisers have encountered in the past, and it allows you to think about, all right, what would you do if you ran into a situation like this one? Important to consider in your fundraising future. As I mentioned earlier, the second section of resources I want to share with you are more nuanced and perhaps less obvious for nonprofit leadership, but important nonetheless, especially as you consider the financial acumen required to lead a nonprofit organization and the increasing importance of technological oversight. And there's no one better to lead off this section, especially on technology, than Bill Connors in episode number 165, who talks about 3 technology traps that nonprofit leaders must avoid. Speaking of technology, in episode number 149, Stu Manewith talked about how to better manage the data that is inherent to all of your technology, fundraising, and administrative programs. And on the financial acumen side of this equation, we had 2 really good episodes that got into some of the tactics of this topic. Alex Romero, episode number 173, and Kevin Briscoe in episode number 177, break down the financial accounting management topics that you as a nonprofit leader need to understand, and they also give practical ideas as to how you can get better, what you need to do to learn and improve your overall financial management skills. Well, those, I hope, get you started in the first 2 categories. We've talked fundraising, we've talked about finance and technology, and now we're going to move into what I'm calling future focus. And I've got a bunch of resources here that I've broken into 3 subcategories. Number 1, board development. What are you going to do in the year ahead to build your board, to better engage the talented individuals that likely make up that leadership group? Secondly, let's talk about your team. What are you doing to build the team culture that your nonprofit frankly requires to deliver the kind of programs you are trying to deliver? And last but not least is your own personal development. What are you going to do to get better yourself? And I know you wouldn't be listening to this kind of podcast if you weren't a lifelong learner and trying to improve your skills and experiences to be a better nonprofit leader. And I've got a bunch of ideas for you to consider right now. So let's start with board development and a wonderful episode with my colleague Lee Williams. It's episode number 140. She and I discuss 5 distinct ways you can build your board and better engage the individuals that comprise this leadership group. Next up on the board development resource list is a wonderful conversation I had with Lisa Cook from Australia. It's episode number 176, and she gives a wonderful display of board governance topics and frankly asks the question, does your nonprofit board have the skills it needs to thrive? And last but not least, in this board development section, you've got to check out episode number 186, my conversation with Hardy Smith, who poses the perfect question and a compelling one: why don't board members do what they're supposed to do? And that is one that you perhaps have wrestled with, and Hardy and I are going to unpack that and help you consider ways to make it better. As you know, the second section of this category is essential to successful nonprofit leadership, and that's the ability to identify, attract, retain, and engage talented individuals to join you on your team to achieve the mission of your nonprofit organization. And I had some wonderful conversations on this exact topic that'll help you build that team culture and team dynamic that you want. You know, it starts with episode number 147. Stammy Despo and Tom LaFalce of Cornell talk about some of the elements they have used to create and sustain a dynamic team building organization. Another great conversation for you to check out is episode number 184. That's where Liz Brigham and I talked about excelling at team development as a nonprofit leader, and she unpacks 3 essential skills there, including entrepreneurship, innovation, and design thinking, and how they affect the recruitment and retention of new and existing talent. Finally, you'll want to revisit episode number 145 with Andrew Olson, one of the most popular episodes we've ever had. And it's a perfect way to assess the level of toxic leadership that might exist in your organization. Sadly, we know that it does, but Andrew is going to give you some specific methods to address negative toxicity, with whether it be on your board, with fellow staff members, or even donors, so that you can get back to focusing on what your nonprofit organization is trying to do. All right, we've talked about your board, we've talked about your staff, and now we need to talk about you, how we can develop a plan for you to get better, and some resources you might consider, as you're likely working on that right now, especially if you're listening to this episode at the end of 2022, looking ahead to 2023. And start with this episode, number 146. My friend Mike St. Pierre will give you 5 key productivity moves to help your nonprofit leadership. Obviously, anything we can do to improve the rituals and routines that help you be more effective and efficient in your work, the better off your organization is going to be as a result. Now, to round off this section on personal development and complete the list of 22 resources for 2022, I'm moving into the library section of this episode. I'm going to list 6 books for you that I read in 2022 that I think will help you on your career planning and professional development journey. Now, before I get into some of these books, a confession. My goal was to read 50 books this year, and it does not look like I'm going to make it as we move into the final days of 2022 as this episode is recorded. I'm probably going to hit 44, 45, but I do think and would encourage you to consider reading goals yourself. Putting this kind of metric has kept me focused on looking for and ultimately reading or listening to some great resource material. All right, the first book I want to share with you is called Your Next 5 Moves. And as you can tell from the title, it has a forward-thinking and futuristic approach to career and personal development. And the author is Patrick Bet-David, and he has 5 distinct questions that I think will are worth pondering as you consider your plan. Number 1, understanding yourself. Number 2, mastering the ability to reason. Number 3, master the building of the right team, speaking of team development that we've just talked about. Number 4, mastering the strategy to scale. How is your organization going to move to the proverbial next level? And that leads, of course, to his 5th question. How do you master what he calls power plays necessary to make that quantum leap that all organizations, I think, dream about, but maybe don't necessarily figure out a way to fulfill? You know, Rhea, Wong and I talked a lot about in our conversation the baggage we often bring to discussions of money and philanthropy and the nuances of giving and getting. And it's tricky, and it leads to the second book recommendation that I found fascinating and would commend to you, and it's Morgan Housel's book called The Psychology of Money. And it's a fantastic and fascinating look at wealth, investing, and personal finance and all of the things inherent to money management, which I think you'll find both personally and professionally worth considering. The third book I want to add to your wish list is called Be Your Future Self Now by Benjamin Hardy. It's a great tactical personal development book, and he breaks down kind of in checklist form things like identifying the 7 threats to your future self, the 7 truths to your future self, the 7 steps to your future self, all of which in worksheet form. Really, it was one of those that I journaled more about because it posed questions that helped me better articulate where I'm going and maybe designing a future self that I could get excited about. Fourth book I want to offer to you is co-authored by Baird and Sullivan, and it's called Leading with Heart. And again, it's another tactical personal development and leadership development book that I would commend to you. It poses the kind of questions you want to consider. What do you need to be at your best? What fears are holding you back? What desires drive you? What are your greatest gifts and how are you leveraging them? and what fundamentally is your purpose. And the authors really break these down in ways that I think will help you in a multitude of arenas, because they talk about, frankly, the 5 core characteristics of the best leaders. And they're aware of their other people's needs. They confront other people's fears. They understand their own desires and what drives them. They leverage their gifts, and they connect with purpose. And I think these are things we're all seeking as we want to become better nonprofit leaders. The 5th book I've got for you is called Building for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. It's by Jason Pfeiffer, and it's fascinating and it's timely because, as we all know, the pandemic created radical change in every aspect of our lives. But Pfeiffer explores similar radical changes that have occurred over history, the lessons learned there, and what we can take from those experiences in the past and apply them to our future. And so I would, again, commend this one to you, especially if you're looking for what I would call kind of a get-out-of-your-head reading experience so that you can think not about tomorrow, but long-term. You know, in our mastermind program, we talk about one of the essential skills for leadership success in the nonprofit sector is communication. All forms of communication, whether it's written, spoken, interpersonal. And that's why this final book I want to bring to your attention was so powerful for me, because it's called Talk Like Ted. The author's Carmine Gallo. And it really was a fascinating look at 9 essential skills or key principles to effective presentation. Of course, TED in this case is TED Talks, the wonderful organization that has brought 18-minute presentations to the forefront. And Carmine gets into what has made some of the most successful presentations so successful and how you can incorporate some of these same principles in every presentation you make, whether it's formally on the stage or simply in a meeting or in a one-on-one conversation. All of our work is involved in creating a compelling message and convincing or persuading, or obviously in the case of nonprofit leadership, seeking investment. You will benefit from this book as you think about your current communications and how you might incorporate some of these best practices into them. Well, I hope these 22 resources from 2022 will be helpful to you. And again, thank you for listening. And I'm hoping that you have heard some of these podcast episodes before, but if you haven't, maybe this will inspire you to check them out. Maybe some of these book recommendations will add to your reading list, and that will make me feel good as well. What would also make me feel good is if you consider sharing this episode and this podcast with other friends and colleagues that are on the path to nonprofit leadership. This podcast comes out every Thursday, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe by going to the podcast page at patmcdowell.com, and you'll see the follow button on that page, and it will assure that you don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes that come out each Thursday. And, of course, if you like this episode and you liked any of the other episodes I mentioned, click on the episodes button on the top of that same page, and you can scroll through all now 190 episodes, and you can sort by guest name or topic or whatever you'd like to find out there. Well, I hope your 2022 was as successful as you wanted it to be, but I'm also guessing you want 2023 to be even better, and I wish that for you as well. Thanks for all the work you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content like this to help you do it even better. Have a great week. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next time on The Path.